I can, thanks. Hi,
Okay.
Rikia.
All right. We'll give it about 60 more seconds and then I'll go ahead and get started.
Sure, okay.
Recording in progress.
Okay, it is right at 7 o'clock, so I'd like to go ahead and get started with tonight's meeting. My name is Rikia Nance, and this meeting is to discuss the Septic to Sewer Connection Program as it relates to the Severn Grove community.
Rikia, I'm afraid I cannot hear you.
Okay.
I can hear you fine.
Okay.
I
Ed,
can hear you as well, Rikia.
Okay. Ed, are you still having trouble hearing me? I am going to take that as you are, but I'm going to continue. Here are a few of the people that you'll be hearing from on the call tonight. From the Anne Arundel County Department of Public Works, we have George Heiner, also Kim Clooney and Lynn Berry. From HDR, in addition to myself, we have Ed Shea and Megan Robinson. Here are a few of the meeting logistics and protocols. Of course, this meeting is being hosted on Zoom. We're going to ask that you please mute yourself if you're not speaking, and to ensure optimal bandwidth, please turn your cameras off. We do have quite a bit of information that we'll be presenting this evening, and we'll be stopping along the way to address those questions. To do that, you can enter your questions using the chat function, or if you prefer, you can use the raise hand function, and we'll address the questions in the order in which they're received. A little bit of background on this meeting. Some of you may have attended a previous meeting that we held in December. And again, this is a similar format. This meeting is designed to help you learn more about the changes to the existing petition process for sewer service extension. We'll explain a little bit more what that community-driven process to connect to public sewer looks like. Please keep in mind that we are not here to obtain a commitment. You are not expected to make any decisions this evening. Ultimately, this is an informational meeting. We will be taking an informal poll later on in the meeting to gauge interest in the program. And ultimately, this is the community's decision whether or not you all want to connect to public sewer. Here's a brief agenda of what we'll be discussing tonight. We'll discuss our water as it relates to Severn Grove and the background as to how we got to this meeting. Then we'll discuss funding and costs, followed by information about the application and petition process. And then we'll follow that with next steps in Q&A. And with that, I'd like to turn things over to George with the Department of Public Works.
Okay, good evening, everyone. I'm George Heiner with Anne Arundel County Department of Public Works. I'm in the Utility Design Division, and I'm going to be speaking at a couple different points tonight. We're going to start with a little bit of background on what we call the Our Water program, and why we're interested in trying to make it more affordable for septic system connections. And then a little later, I'll be on to talk about the petition process and how that works within the county. As Rikia mentioned, we've had some earlier meetings with different parts of the community. So if you've joined us for those meetings, there'll be a little bit of repetition of some of that information. But for those that haven't joined us before, we thought it was probably useful to go over some of the background. And Please feel free to ask questions in the chat box as we go through. Rakia will be kind of monitoring the chat box, and we'll stop in a couple different places for questions so we can try to keep up to date. We do have a lot of information to go over, so we'll pause at different points and try to answer questions. So what is the Our Water program? So the Our Water program is an integrated strategy Anne Arundel County has developed to try to meet our long-term, it's a long-term strategy designed to improve the health of our waterways and strengthen our water resiliency. And can you go to the next slide? It really has 5 separate initiatives that we are working on. One is small system upgrades, where we are looking at taking over smaller privately run systems and upgrading them or providing assistance to upgrade them so they can meet nitrogen removal standards and improve treatment. Another aspect is our ongoing stormwater management program. This is run out of the Watershed Protection and Restoration Bureau, but still within Public Works. A groundwater resiliency component, and then wastewater treatment enhancements. So the county has spent and invested a lot of money over the last 10 years improving the wastewater treatment at all its facilities. We're getting excellent removal right now at all of them, and we're going to be looking to try to maintain that performance and improve it going forward. And the component that we're talking about tonight is the septic to sewer connection program. You can go to the next slide. So why is DPW, why is the county interested in connecting septic systems? The main thing that we are interested with septic systems is improving the removal of nitrogen. So conventional septic systems are not very effective at removing nitrogen from the wastewater, and that nitrogen makes its way into the receiving streams. By comparison, our wastewater treatment plants, which I mentioned have been upgraded, remove 90% more nitrogen than a conventional septic system. So, and particularly those in the critical areas. So one of the main benefits that the county would see in connecting septic systems is lowering of the nitrogen that's discharged to the waterways. Can you go to the next slide? So Anne Arundel County has a lot of septic systems, 40,000 septic systems throughout the county. 13,000 systems are within what's called the critical area. And that's an area that's within 1,000 feet of a tidal waterway. That 13,000 is actually 25% of all the critical area septic systems in the state are here in Anne Arundel County. And for our county, it is a significant source of nitrogen into the waterways. I think there was a question in the chat. All pollutants in the bay from sewage leaks are of private leaks. So, okay, so the comment was that you hear a lot about leaks from the public system. So those are called sanitary sewer overflows. And those do happen. We have in our county very good record of minimizing those, but they do happen and they are in the news when you hear about them. And those are usually larger events, which is also why they're going to be in the news. A septic system effluent discharge is really what we're talking about here. Is so the effluent from your septic system is going through the soil column, and it's eventually getting into the groundwater, and that's going to make its way into the receiving stream. So what we're talking about here with the nitrogen discharge is that a conventional septic system isn't designed to remove nitrogen, and in only very specific set of circumstances would it do that naturally. Whereas our treatment plants are specifically designed to remove nitrogen. So I'm not saying that there aren't sanitary sewer overflows, but in terms of when, particularly in a an incident, say, that would be on the news. It's going to be a larger spill from a public system. So what are some of the benefits for the public benefit, okay, for connecting septic systems? And that's what we're trying to describe here. Less total nitrogen discharge into the waterways in the bay. This is going to help us maintain compliance with state requirements. There is, as many people, and not everybody knows, but there's a Chesapeake Bay, what's called a total maximum daily load. It's basically a watershed nutrient balance. It's sometimes called a pollution diet for a waterway. And one of the factors that is important in the Chesapeake Bay is the amount of nitrogen. So that's something that we are looking as a county on how can we lower our nitrogen loads. Obviously, the nitrogen load that goes into a local waterway eventually makes it into the bay. So improvements, connection of septic systems that helps lower the nitrogen loads will also help the local waterways. I think one thing that most people are not aware is all of the county's waterways are listed as impaired for nutrients and other pollutants. So even the ones that don't have any public treatment plant discharge are listed as impaired. So go to the next slide. So there are some benefits for the homeowner from septic connections, and we've tried to summarize these. These are very site specific, and you really would have to think about the benefits as you're thinking about the whole program. Or any of these benefits really things that you might see at your particular property? So the first one is that home additions and septic systems are often tied, the size of them are often tied to the size of the house. And so in some instances, homeowners can be restricted with what they can do with a building addition because of the size of their septic system or their drain field. So if you're on the public system, that type of restriction would go away. As I mentioned, the tank goes into a drain field, and that takes space in your yard. So if you're on a public system, you don't need to have that dedicated field. And there's usually actually a drain field and then a reserve for future drain field is what's typically done. And there also may be a positive impact on your home value, but again, that's a very site specific thing as well. If that is something that is motivating or I guess a possible factor in your thinking about it, we would suggest trying to talk to a realtor about that for your area. Could you go to the next slide? And then if you have nearby drinking water wells and you make a connection to the public sewer, obviously you're not going to have a risk of septic discharge eventually getting towards your well. I've mentioned the improvement to nearby waterways, and there are some savings to the maintenance costs of septic systems. You go to the next slide. And here we just have some of the costs that you would not occur if you connected. So there's the pump out of the septic system. And these numbers are probably a little old. I think we generated this slide last year. So $100 last fall isn't quite $100 now. The drain field replacement can be most costly. That's probably the most costly part if your drain field needs to be replaced. And in some cases, if your septic system fails, you could have to upgrade to what's called a BAT. That's a best available technology. That is a septic system that is designed for nitrogen removal. And on the right-hand side, we have some of the operating costs for really the fundamental difference of that is for a BAT system. That's one that's designed to remove nitrogen. It has more moving parts, and it has usually some aeration devices, some mixing devices. So it costs more to own and maintain that system than a traditional septic system. Next slide. So that was a quick background. I mean, we have an overall need throughout the county to try to reduce our nutrient loads and improve our waterways. We've developed this process, which, as Rukia mentioned, it's a modification, or it's really an addition to the petition process that already exists in the county. And our goal for this program has been to try to connect up to 6,000 private septic systems to the public sewer over the next 30 years. So we think if we can, combined with the other program elements, if we can meet this goal of 6,000 over 30 years, we can help maintain our nitrogen loads going forward. So this program was developed after several from several years back, and we won't go through all of the details, but there was initial concept planning which came out of the Chesapeake Bay total maximum daily load and what was called a watershed implementation plan. So the states required all the counties to develop a watershed implementation plan to meet nutrient reduction targets. And the county's target at that time, this was called the WIP phase 2. The county's target was a reduction of 50,000 or 50% of the nitrogen load approximately. So we were initially doing concept planning, trying to determine if we could hook up to 20,000 septic systems in order to meet that state guidance. Once we realized the cost and the magnitude of the program, we initiated a septic task force, and that had different representation from environmental groups and business groups. And we try to get their feedback on how to structure the program, develop priorities, and what kind of incentives. And that helped us develop legislation that actually created the ability to do these, some of the subsidies and deferments, which we're going to talk a lot more about in detail coming up here. And then we also developed an application system and an implementation plan. So there's been a lot of background behind the program, really oriented in towards how can we make it more affordable for people to connect if they think it's a good fit for their community. Can you go to the next slide?
Sure, George. I do see one question in the chat. The resident is asking, because the public discharge is not into Saltworks Creek, would our creek see a disproportionate environmental benefit if everyone along our creek switched over?
Okay. I'm not sure I would call it disproportionate environmental benefit. I mean, there would be a benefit in the immediate environs from the connection. And because what would happen is that septic tank effluent that goes through the ground, makes its way into the groundwater, that would now get pumped over to a public treatment facility. So that discharge would stop. But I wouldn't say it would be, I guess I wouldn't characterize it as disproportionate, unless I'm misunderstanding the question. In terms of where the county is thinking in providing the subsidy and trying to make this more affordable is, in aggregate, we have not really made much progress at all in connecting septic systems. So we've made lots of progress on stormwater improvements. We've made tremendous progress in wastewater discharges. We have not made much progress in reducing loads from septic systems. So that's really where sort of the DPW is interested, is trying to figure out if there is a way to make this more affordable and to homeowners. Most of the houses do not have approved replacement dry well sites. What happens when these fail? So if you do not have an approved secondary drain field, I guess the worst That's really a question for the health department. I know they can, in certain circumstances, they can kind of order you to pump out your system instead of continuing to discharge it. I'm not sure what their criteria is for making that determination. So I don't want to give the impression that that is the only answer. I just know that that can happen, and I'm certainly not trying to, I don't want it to come across that we're trying to scare people into doing this program either. So, but the health department makes that determination if you have a failing septic system. And yeah, whether you, and it can be, really whether you have room for that system would depend on your site layout. So, okay, so on this next slide, we are showing, this is an overview of really the program area. And in the green are the county's planned sewer service areas. The blue on this slide we're going to mention the term like eligible areas a bit tonight as we go through the program. And because the eligible area is defined in the county code as the areas that can get the subsidy and the partial deferment. And so you can see that this is really where the emphasis of the program is these eligible areas close to the waterways. And Severn Grove is an eligible area because it's in the critical area. And your area is also an eligible area if it is part of a project area within the critical area. So we're going to get to I'll talk more about that when we get to the layout. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so I see a question in the chat. Are there systems that don't require a leach field? So I think that answer is no. I'm going to make that a caveat because I'm not I'm not a complete expert on all on-site wastewater technologies. But the way a septic system works is that the solids are retained in the tank. The liquid goes over basically an effluent weir and goes into a drain field. So in terms of how a definition of how a septic system and the septic system and the drain field works, they always have this leach field. If you find yourself in a situation where you're not allowed to discharge to that leach field, let's say the health department says you have to build holding tanks, at that point you don't have a septic system. You just have holding tanks, and you have to arrange to have a hauler come out on a regular basis and haul out your tank. So a dry well, I'll need to research that term a little bit. There's a distinction a little bit between a dry well and a leach field, and there's also some crossover terminology between what's sometimes just used for stormwater collection. And so I see in the chat box there's some discussion about dry wells versus leach fields. I would probably want to come back to take a look at that, but there's some overlapping terminology there. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the potential area. Excuse me. So in a petition project, what's going on is the community is petitioning Public Works to extend service to their area. Okay, that's the way it's described in the county code. And so the project area would be from the point of connection to the county system out to the end of the defined project area. So it has to be contiguous properties, and it's basically all properties adjacent to the proposed alignment. So what we're showing on this diagram is what that would look like for Severn Grove, but it would also include all of the areas down along the road to get down to the main road. So And that is because there has to be a contiguous set of properties. Okay, so if you're going to go all the way out to the creek, it has to contain all those properties. So there might be some people joining us tonight that were not in some of the earlier meetings, because I think we had some earlier meetings that were really just with the Saltworks community and the Severn Grove community. And there's been a little more discussion about whether there's some interest there. So they would have to be included. So there's a question about the color coding on the slides. So basically what's shown on the slide is a potential arrangement or a potential service alignment. The red line is for what's called a force main. The green line is a gravity line, and the yellow is what's called the low pressure line. That's really more of a distinction for us on the engineering side. It actually tells us whether it has to be pumped or whether it's can flow by gravity. For the purposes of I guess just sort of understanding the project area, it's you're really probably looking at the blue line, which is the border of the HOA, and then the adjacent properties as you come out towards the main road. So there's a comment that said in the last call, due to the number of private roads, they said all residents on private roads would need to agree to an easement or the county cannot do that. Is this true? Yes, that is true. If the road in question is a private road and the county is going to put public infrastructure in that road, the county needs to have an easement. And so whatever the governing arrangement is for that easement, that privately owned road, then let's say, for example, I'm not explaining that too well. Let's say you have 5 people and they share rights to this private road. If that document says all 5 have to agree to an easement and one of the 5 does not want to agree to the easement, then the county would not be able to put the infrastructure in, because we have to have access to the infrastructure through an easement. So that question is still, the answer is still yes. The county needs an easement in order to maintain the anything that's installed. Okay. Let's go back one slide. Sorry, Ricky. So just on the main basic facts here on the area that we're showing is the in the Severn Grove area, the 80 lots, there's additional 50 lots as you go down the road towards I think that's Bestgate Road. And there are some vacant lots, but a number of these lots are associated with existing lots throughout the HOA. There's a lot of small lots in this community, which is not uncommon in a lot of older communities. Okay, so now we can go to questions. Sorry. Okay, so we're going to pause here for some questions, really on the program or the layout. And then in the next section, we're going to talk more about the funding and the cost. So I guess if there's any other questions just about either the Chesapeake Bay total maximum daily load or the petition process, or maybe the project area, we can answer some of those. We can always come back to questions at the end too. If not, I'm going to hand it off to Ed Shea, and Ed is with HDR, and that is a consulting firm that's been helping us develop the aspects of the program. They also help us with some of the technical stuff. Rakia works for HDR. She did our introductions. She helps us with the communications and organizing all these presentations. So Ed, you want to take it for a little while?
George, there's another question in the chat box. How deep are the mains below the road surface?
Okay. Sorry, I didn't see that. Thanks, Kim. that is going to vary depending on how your area is, how your immediate area is served. So in that low pressure line, can you go back to the map? I know I just said don't worry about the color of the lines, but to answer this, it's you. So a low pressure line is actually a pumped line. Okay, so we use that when we can't serve the area by gravity. And when you have a pumped line, the only thing that is really important is that it stays 4 feet below ground because it needs to not freeze. Okay, so properties that are served by and use what's called a grinder pump to serve in a low pressure line. So if your area has these yellow lines, it would, the line could be relatively shallow because it really only has to be 4 feet. When you get into the gravity lines, so now you want to flow by gravity, so everything starts to get dictated by the other elevations, right? So you do a gravity system layout. You'd start down there at Bestgate Road, and there's design criteria for depending on the diameter of the pipe and the slope, and really you would backtrack it. So I can't really answer that right off the top of my head, other than to say the low pressure ones will be shallower because they're pumped, and the deepest part of the line is going to be where you connect. The gravity line is going to be where you connect into the main road. Okay, but it's still going to need to be. I forget. There's a certain depth that needs to be really at the side of your property. I might be able to look that up while Ed's talking. So. And there's a question about how far off the road will trees need to be removed. So we would have to look at that more closely if we were working on a project area. But generally our infrastructure, we're going to try to put that in the road and minimize any tree disturbance that happens. Green line, but I got this. Okay, so there's a comment about that their individual line is very deep, and how could they be on gravity? So, I mean, we haven't looked at the details of any of these particular homes. So what we're showing here is a concept level layout, and if this was a project that would move forward, we would be doing progressively more detail. So that's, if your line is that deep, it's probably not going to be a gravity line because there's no way we'd be able to flow from wherever that is out to Bestgate Road. So there's a question about, would we do other utility services like electrical and cable? So that's no. The county DPW only does water lines and sewer lines. There already is a water line that goes along Severn Grove Road, kind of out past the front of the Severn Grove community. And the sewer lines are something we would do. All the other utilities are put in by the separate companies. There's a question about water. So there is public water along Severn Grove Road. So, and sometimes when we talk to community, they ask if they can do water and sewer together. In this instance, a water petition would really just be for Severn Grove HOA because there's public water available off Severn Grove Road. And it's already available to everyone else on that road. Right. So your water system and your sewer system extension are very different in this particular situation. Yes. Okay, Ed, why don't you take us to the next section?
Okay, great, George. And I just want to acknowledge the dry well design. As George mentioned, there is a stormwater infrastructure approach that we call a dry pit or a dry well, and it has a similar operating principle. So we acknowledge that that's in use in septic systems. We haven't seen that yet in the community meetings we've been doing as part of this program. I think perhaps this might be an older design, and that could be the reason. But we see all the messages in the chat and acknowledge that that's an approach to having septic without a drain field. So this first slide covers the per property cost and the different elements of that cost. There's three basic elements. There's the project cost to construct the local sewers in the right-of-way. There's the on-site costs, or what we call the private side costs on your property. And then there's the capital facility connection charge, which is the county's investment in the WRF capacity, the wastewater reclamation facility where your wastewater is treated. On the next slide, we look a little bit more closely at these on-site costs. So what happens to your septic tank? The tank, and in the case of the dry well, that's a part of the system, that would be abandoned. And so the health department would have guidance on properly abandoning your septic system. There would be a new sewer lateral on site that connects to a cleanout that's typically located right at the property line near where it connects to the public sewer. And this cost on the private side, this is what would be paid for by the homeowner. The project cost is on the other side of the property line. That's what's managed and paid for by the county. So you would be responsible for this element of the cost, this element of the project. So looking at average project cost per household, again, this is the public side of the sewer system that will be constructed. Severn Grove is among the eligible communities with higher project costs. In December, when we met last, Severn Grove was a little bit closer to the average. And since that time, we've taken a closer look at the way the lots are configured, how the tax accounts are assigned, the zoning for minimum lot sizes. And we anticipate that fewer sewer connections will be constructed as a result. And so that means the per property project costs become a little bit higher. On this next slide, we're looking at the typical private side costs. So this was from a compilation of private costs over the past 5 or 7 years, what we've seen as typical on-site costs. Usually they're in that $4,000 to $6,000 range, maybe $6,000 to $8,000. They're typically less than $10,000. So depending on if your home is set back further from the roadway, that's one thing that could drive up the cost on your property, but simply because you have a longer distance to connect to the sewer. So we'll pause right there with any questions.
Yeah, I'm confused. The graph you showed with the 90 to 100,000 for Severn Grove, and then you go to this next chart and you're saying depending on how far it's set back. Last time we were on the call, they said it would be $40,000 plus any additional like private contractor costs, which looks like that's going to be significant to have septic systems removed. So for the county connection fee, what are we looking at? Because I didn't understand that graph with the 90 to 100,000 with the other chart you brought up. So what are we looking at?
Yeah, I understand. So the costs that are incurred per property is not the same thing as what the homeowner is going to pay. So in the next set of slides coming up, we'll talk about the funding options and we'll show you the typical cost per homeowner and the financing options. So I think the number that you're remembering from the last time we did this presentation, it sounds like it was the assessment value, the annual assessment. So we'll talk about that in further detail. And looks like the comment we had about needing a grinder will add considerable cost. It would add, I guess it's just different depending on how far it has to connect. The grinder pump is going to be maintained by the county, and we can address that with some other slides later in the presentation about how that would impact the cost. So starting with this side, we'll talk about, and we have one more question I'm noticing now. $4,000 to $6,000 average the cost to remove the current septic and connect. Yes, that's basically what we're saying. It's not actually removing the current septic, but rather abandoning it, which is a common practice. You're leaving most of the unit in the ground and just simply sealing it and covering it so that it's safe. And that's the typical cost, $4,000 to $6,000 for most of these installations, for both the abandoning the septic tank and connecting to the sewer. For individual houses, for each home, that would be the cost. Okay, so looking at potential funding sources, the Septic Task Force initiated legislation to allow a subsidy for a percentage of the project costs. So again, this is the public side costs. The state also has a fund that homeowners pay into now, and that's called the Bay Restoration Fund. So those grants can be used to offset the on-site costs or offset the CFCC. So the county's been working with the state on this, the use of this BRF fund, and we're looking for ways to take advantage of the state revolving fund and other low interest loans to keep the financing costs down. The potential project subsidy, which is awarded based on a project ranking system. So each year there's an application cycle. And if your community were to submit an application, you'd be ranked against other communities. It's also based upon available funding, although right now there is funding in place. And then for income, for homeowners with income less than $300,000 per year, or households with less than $300,000 per year, up to 25% subsidy could be provided. So per property cost. So again, that high number we were looking at in the earlier slides of $90,000, we're talking about 25% of that per property cost offered as a subsidy. For higher income households, it's a half subsidy, so 12.5%. And this is used to reduce the annual assessment. So this is a new part of the program. This is not available in the current sewer connection petition program. This is part of this septic to sewer program that's just been initiated. So this slide on the Bay Restoration Fund grant program, and it looks like the next slide after this, please. Yep. This describes the current BRF or Bay Restoration Fund grant arrangement with county residents. So it could be used for assistance with the private on-site costs or the CFCC. It can be available after the sewer main is extended. So once you are required to connect to the sewer, you hire a contractor, and when the homeowner is ready to get reimbursed, the health department administers the grant funds, and the payment is made directly to the licensed plumber. So depending on income, like we said before, the income limits, funding can be up to $20,000. And the state funding for this program is limited each fiscal year. So that's why we say it depends on the availability of funding. But currently it is available. Going to the next slide, it's another way to look at these costs. To get to the assessment, this slide shows how the costs are built up. So the construction cost, that was the higher cost in the chart earlier that was referenced, the $90,000. That cost, along with any other project costs, including design, any kind of easements that need to be purchased, inspections, construction management, that gets converted into a net assessable amount. And that amount, minus any kind of, the subsidy from the county, the state grant, interest, that turns into your assessment, each homeowner's assessment that is paid annually over a 40-year term. And again, this term is new with this program. It used to be 30 years, and now it's a 40-year term. Currently, assuming that the county can get $5,000 from the state to lower the assessment, so that $20,000 that we talked about, $15,000 would be used for the on-site costs. And that's enough to cover the on-site as well as the capital facility connection charge. Then there would be $5,000 to reduce the assessment costs. So again, households earning up to $300,000 a year are eligible for the 25% county subsidy. There's an option to defer payments for up to 50%. And for those who are eligible for elderly or low income, and low income or permanently disabled, and there's a definition of that in county code where this option comes from. Those people are eligible to defer 100% of costs for the 40 years or until the house is sold. And we're going to go into that in a little bit more detail coming up with an example. So then there would be 15,000 BRF funding for the on-site costs in the CFCC. Household income higher than 300,000, it's a half subsidy. There's still a deferment option, and there's also a half BRF funding amount available. Vacant lots are treated a little bit differently. There's no subsidy available, no option to defer payments, and there's no BRF fund. So now this is the slide where we talk about the annual costs.
Ed, before we jump into that, I did want to address a question from a resident going back to the $40,000 figure. She wants to know how that was arrived at, and also if there's a way to summarize what the bottom line is.
You know, I'm not sure what the $40,000 figure is. I think when we work through one of the examples coming up, it should help answer a little bit of that. But I think I'd have to, maybe while Kim is talking, I can go back and look at the old slides and see if I can find where the 40,000 was referenced. And I think we're trying to get to the bottom line right now on this slide. And then going to the vacant lot question, vacant lots are still charged the $90K. No, they're not charged $90K. That's the project cost. So that's, again, I think we got to get through these next few slides to better explain that. So the bottom line, this is what the annual cost would look like. For those who do not defer any costs, this bar on the left would be in the range of $2,000 to $3,000 per year, and this is for 40 years. If you take a 50% deferment, then annually you'd be paying around $1,250 a year to $1,700. And then that third bar with just the blue line shows subsidy with 100% deferment. Okay, so that the reason why that blue line is where it is, that represents just paying the sewer usage fees. So the sewer bill that you get every quarter amounts to about, on average, $35 a month. And so that's what that blue bar is showing there, about $420 a year just for the sewer usage fee with no payments on the assessment. So we're looking here at the total costs that you would experience as a homeowner with your annual assessment and your usage fees. And then on the right side, those three bars represent the same for households who are higher income and getting the reduced subsidy. So just hypothetically, if you were looking at subsidy and deferment, subsidy and 50% deferment, and you were coming in around, let's say, $1,500 per year of a cost, multiplied by 40 years, that would be closer to $60,000, which is not the same as the $40,000 number we're looking for, but we'll see if we can go back and look on those slides if there was something else that was described there.
Okay, hey Ed, but that's assuming we stay in our homes that long and pay that every year. Otherwise, we're looking at a huge lien against our home that when we sell it, we've got to pay that at the time of house sale, correct?
Yes, and we're going to go into that just to make it as clear as possible as soon as I hand it over to Kim.
Can I step in here for just a second?
And this is actually where you step in. So you've rescued me, Kim. Thank you.
So the assessment does not have to be paid off when you sell the home. If you defer half of the assessment, the deferred part has to be paid off before you sell the home. But if you don't do the deferral, and even if you do the deferral, the remaining amounts would be passed on to the next homeowner.
Okay, the last presentation, it said it would be a lien against our home that would be paid off at the time that we sold it, which I'm not going to live another 40 years. So, you know.
The deferral of the 50% would have to be paid off if you deferred half of the assessment.
Yeah, I still don't understand what. So we're looking at $2,000 a year until we die, basically, because I'm not living 40 more years, unless some freak of science comes along. But so how is this paid? Like, is this on the tax bill? Like, how is this paid?
It's a separate bill that comes out in January of every year.
And we don't really know what that number is until it's hooked up, because it depends on how far back it is from the house. So on top of our expensive property tax bills, we're going to get another bill every January to pay as well. That could be like possibly even $3,000 to $4,000. That's going to be paid over a period of 40 years.
This assessment is just what the county's paying on the project cost. The cost for your on-site would be paid by you initially. It wouldn't be part of the assessment.
Okay, I just feel like I'm going in circles here trying to get an answer for the actual cost. So, all right, thank you.
We've tried to present what we think the costs are. There's several different financing approaches. What point are you thinking? We're trying to be clear. We're trying to present as much information as we can. What point would you like clarified?
It's just all confusing. All these graphs you guys keep putting up, and I appreciate the presentation and the fact that you're working, after hours tonight. I do appreciate it. It's confusing when all these graphs are being presented to us. And this happens, and this is, if you're in this category, then you get this much. And here's these different color lines, like it's a deferment here, and this. It's very confusing. And then on top of that, we have, and it depends on how much your setback is, and that's right. And you also have to pay to have your septic removed. And there's a master plumber charge in there somewhere. I just don't understand how much I'm looking at here. It seems it's all very confusing. And I'm not really sure where we stand as far as what is the bottom line cost. What am I going to be paying every January? Or if I get deferment of some sort, and then how is that going to impact when I'm trying to sell the home or something? Or, it's just a lot of information to try to take in and understand what these graphs are really stating. So but I do appreciate your time, and I want to thank you guys for doing this.
So we'll take as many questions as anyone wants to ask tonight. We will also be posting the slides. We'll talk about this a little bit later on a community webpage that we'd set up, and you can always contact us with additional questions. I know there's a little bit of frustration because we're showing a lot of different numbers. We're providing the best information that we have, and it is a complicated process. It's easier for us to understand because we've done a lot of these presentations now. But we actually, it is the petition process in general is confusing, whether it's separate from the subsidies and the deferments. The petition process can be confusing process. But I mean, I guess I wanted to clarify a few things. Is one thing that Kim was talking about is that, so when in the overall scheme of what's happening is the residents are asking DPW to extend sewer to their area. And whatever that project costs at the end is going to be turned into the assessment. So that's why we can't give you a hard number about any particular thing right now. We don't actually issue the final assessment until the job is over. As you go through the petition process, and we'll talk more about this, there's opportunities for the community to vote on it. And we'll talk about what that means a little later in the presentation. I know someone said that they frustrated because they're being asked to make a decision when we can't pinpoint the number. You're not being asked to make any kind of decision tonight. What we're trying to do is explain the program a little bit. And we've made some changes to make septic connections more affordable. They're still expensive. We know that. The reason we made the changes is because as countywide, we'd like to see more people connect their septic systems. And one of the things that the feedback we got from the task force was to try to really keep a voluntary program, but create some incentives to see if we can encourage people to consider it. And it's still a community decision. So this is an informational meeting only. So there's no, and we're going to ask for a poll a little bit later. That's not a binding vote in any way. We just want to get a sense of whether this is too much money or not, or if there's still some interest or not any interest. So I hope I can, I hope that explains the context more. If you we're going to go through the process a little bit further, so you'll see there's more points where we would come back and we would be refining things, and we'd be refining the numbers a bit. But I guess, sorry, Kim, it was your turn to talk. So why don't you go ahead now?
Hey, George, before Kim starts, there was one question I wonder if you could answer now. What does this mean for the vacant lots that are currently not buildable because of septic restrictions? Will they now become buildable?
I believe they would, yes. If that was the only reason that they couldn't be buildable. There can be other reasons, but if that was the only reason, then that would relieve that restriction. There's a comment about the voting and the dollar numbers. We're going to talk about that when we, in a little bit, when we get to the petition process. And on the private road, there's a question about a private road easement. Whether we could get an easement on a private road would depend on what the current legal arrangement is for easements on that road. So I can't really speak to that. I would say if there is no agreement, the question is, if there is no agreement, does everybody have to agree? I'm not a land use lawyer, so I can't really answer that at all. Who would pay to restore the road? The county's contractor would return everything to its previous condition. So we would have, as part of our public contractor work, they would restore the road. Okay, I'm going to take a look at this. There's a question specifically about the layout. I'll take a little bit of a look at this while Kim is going to go through the deferral section. Okay.
All right. So I'm going to describe the deferral just briefly here. There's two different types of deferrals that are available in the county. So the first is the partial deferral of repayment. This is available to all residential homeowners that are in the project area, and it's an option that you can choose. This deferral is on the total per property cost of the assessment. that deferred portion becomes payable at the time of the deed transfer or after 40 years. So just as an example, if the total 40-year assessment was $80,000, without the deferral, you would be paying $2,000 a year as your annual assessment payment. If you chose to do the 50% deferral option, you could defer 40,000 of that 80,000, and then your yearly assessment would drop to $1,000 a year. And then whenever you sold the house, you would pay that $40,000 back. And then the next owner would continue to pay that $1,000 a year. So if you sold the house after 5 years, you would be paying that $1,000 for 5 years and then pay the $40,000 whenever you sold the house. And then the next owner would pay that $1,000 for the remaining 35 years. Go ahead to the next slide. So there is a full deferral option that is available to qualifying owners. This is for elderly and disabled people, and there are income limitations. This is 100% deferral. And this also would become payable at the time of deed transfer for the sale of the home. And in this case, you would have, it's basically the same $80,000 we were using as an example. That $2,000 a year would not be paid. So you would be paying zero. And then whenever you sold the home, you would pay just those deferred payments. And then the next owner would continue paying the rest of that $2,000 a year every year. So in this case, after 10 years, as an example, you would pay the 10 $2,000 payments, which would be the $20,000. Go ahead to the next slide. And this, we just kind of put them both together just as a comparison. So if you were to sell the house after 5 years, if you did the 50% deferment that's available for anyone, that payment whenever you sold the house would be the $40,000 that would be paid there. If you qualified for the elderly or disabled deferment option, then if you sold the house after 5 years, you would be paying back the $10,000. Or if you, sold your house after 10 years, it would be 20,000. After 15, it would be 30. It's just the deferred payments for that amount of time that you would be paying back.
Kim, I do have a quick question from a resident.
Okay.
Does inheritance count as deed transfer?
As long as one of the original owners, and I would have to check just to make sure on this, but my understanding is that as long as one of the original owners is still the owner of the house, then that would not be considered as a deed transfer. But if it is being passed on to someone else that was not one of the original owners of the home, then that would need to be paid back then.
Thank you.
Hi, Kim. This is Michelle. I put a little comment in there about why isn't the 50% prorated like the elderly column? For example, like if you defer half, but you've only lived in the house for 5 years, why do you still have to pay $40,000 when you didn't live in the house for half the time? See how the 50%?
Yeah, I understand. The way that the legislation was written was deferring half of the total amount and not deferring half of each individual payment. And that's why it's different as of now.
That doesn't make sense to me. I don't know why that would be like that. There'd be no reason to defer then. Because you're actually going to pay more by deferring. If I sold my house in 5 years and paid my $2,000 a year, I've only paid $10,000. And then the new owner would pay the rest, right?
Yes.
In this example, they're billing me for $40,000 when I sell my house in 5 years. That somebody screwed that up. That's not right. Doesn't make any sense. And then
I understand your confusion on that.
Yeah, that's a bad deal.
I understand your comments on that.
Unless you're going to live in it 20 years, then do it. But I'm not going to. So correct. That would be a bad deal for me.
And it's an option. And the option is, you can defer up to 50% if you choose to do that. So, you would have to look at your own personal situation and, what makes the most sense to you, whether it makes sense to defer anything or to defer part of it. It's just, we use 50% because that's the maximum that's allowed to be deferred. But it is an option, and, individuals will make different choices as to whether they want to defer or not, how much they want to defer up to the 50%. So it doesn't have to be 50% or zero. It can be, anything. It's just that, that's the decision that the homeowners would need to make whenever we go into the repayments after it's been installed.
Michelle, I think what's confusing you is the full assessed value is $80,000. If you defer
Right.
$40,000 of it and sell your house after 5 years, paying $10,000, there's $30,000 left that the new owner will have to pay on, but you have to pay the $40,000 that you deferred.
Right. Like, why wouldn't I just pay the 10? Why wouldn't I just owe 10,000 and then, because I've only lived there 5 years, it's like $2,000 a year. That's what I don't understand. But yeah, you hit it. It's confusing
Well,
me.
I think it's a lot of this.
Well, I guess I was just going to say the intent of this slide was just to explain how the deferment works.
We can take a moment and get caught up on the questions in the chat. Is there a list compiling the questions that have been asked and answered previously so we don't ask the same questions? We are compiling the questions and they will be made available after the meeting. But as far as a running list that's available in real time, there is not.
But Rakia, we do have meeting summaries on the website, correct?
Yes,
From the last meeting,
that's correct.
as well as the slides
Yes.
for anybody who wants to go back and check numbers presented back in December.
Right. The slides, the recording, and also the meeting summary are available on the Severn Grove community page. And I'll put that short link in the chat right now.
Was there any more questions in the chat box that I needed to address?
Does each owner have one vote, or is there one vote per each property?
So the votes are based off of the tax ID. So each tax ID has one vote.
And then there was also a follow-up to the question about the location of the backup generator. How often is the backup generator tested? For how long? And what is the noise level?
I think this is a reference to we would have a sewage pumping station located within the Severn Grove area. Generators are tested once a week. I forget right now how long the test is. I want to say 30 minutes, but I would need to double check that. And I would need to check on the noise level. They are specified with sound proofing, but I don't recall what the noise level restriction is or what the design criteria is.
How is it determined where that pumping station would be located?
So if we were going to move forward with a project in this area, we want to get as much flow by gravity to the sewer pump station, because its gravity connection is the lowest cost over the long term for operating and maintaining the system. So we would look for a lower elevation area in the community, someplace that's either a community HOA owned property or a vacant lot of some sort. And that's where we would try to direct the flow down to. And we're working on, concept, designs that for pumping stations in sort of, areas where they're more visible to communities. And that's something we would, if the project was going forward, we would be presenting at a public meeting to talk about.
One more question. If the homeowner is responsible for putting in the pump and grinder on their own property to the road, is the homeowner also responsible for subsequent maintenance on that?
So a grinder pump that would be installed by the county's contractor as part of the project. Your private plumber would be responsible for doing rearranging the piping around your house and bringing it out to the grinder pump system. And then in the future, so when we put a grinder pump in, the county requires an easement around the grinder pump. It's usually 20 by 20. And the county will maintain and operate that grinder pump. So the owner pays for the electricity to run the grinder pump, but the maintenance of it is the county's responsibility. I'm just taking a couple notes. So we had noise level for generators, duration of testing. Ed, did we have a spot in mind for the pumping station?
Yeah, George, the preliminary sewer layout showed it at the end of Severn Drive.
Okay.
Closer to Saltworks Creek, as that was, one of the lower spots that was central to a significant part of the community.
And, really at this stage of we're kind of looking at this neighborhood on an overview map and saying, well, what does it look like is probably possible in terms of the way the terrain is falling. So it's not like we've done any kind of siting study or anything. That's what we would be looking at if a project went forward. So why don't we go to, I see we're getting a few more questions on grinder pumps. I think I can answer them though.
I'm sorry for unmuting, but a great number of our residences are well below street level. So each house will need its own macerator, grinder, whatever you want to call it, to even get up to the sewer main.
Yes. Yeah. So what in that instance, we would the cost for the pump could be included in the public, what we would call the public side cost. That pump could be located back further on your property, but the county would not maintain it at that point. So that you don't have to double pump, for example. So you could just have one pump. Otherwise, you'd have to pump from your property up to the county's grinder pump and then pump into the system. But in that instance, the county operations personnel are not going to come back onto your personal property to maintain that pump. And I think in the graph that Ed presented earlier, it shows the typical cost, and we talked about how historically it's $4,000 to $6,000. Again, those are older numbers; they're not today's numbers. But that same, actually, Ricky, do you want to try to go to that slide?
Sure.
It's number, I think it's 23.
Let's see. This one?
The next one. So this curve this is like a frequency, but not like it is. It's a frequency chart of these on-site costs. So you can see the most common costs are in this 2,000 to 6,000 range, right? Close to 45% to 50% of this data set was saying, 2,000 to 6,000. But you can see out here on the far right, there is a significant number of times when the costs were $14,000 to $18,000. So I don't know anything about the specifics of those properties, but I can surmise that what's going on is that those are houses that are either very far from the property line, or they're in the situation where they have to do extra pumping, or there's some intricate thing going on at their property. So it really depends. When we are saying that it depends on your on-site conditions, that's really what we're kind of talking about. If the topography or even just the layout of your lot makes it difficult, it can be more costly. That's one of the things you can see on this chart. Now, there can be bay restoration funding that can support these costs, which is what Ed was also talking about. And that's actually where this chart comes from. We got data from the health department that showed the reimbursement costs at different properties. So that's how we developed this chart. Okay, I had you jump around, Ricky. I think we were at the application and petition process slide.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, I think I covered if you had an on-site grinder pump, that could be included in that initial cost. Do we have to have our own separate grinder? I think I answered that question. We will show a picture, a diagram of what a grinder pump looks like in a little bit. That's a little further on in the presentation. The double, that would mean double. What I was trying to explain is that we would not require double pumping. We would try to work that out so that there would be one pump and it could pump up into the system. One we have at one of my facilities, a 5 horsepower motor. That sounds like a description of a grinder pump system. And as I mentioned, we're going to show a diagram of that a little bit. There's a comment that we presented a different price at the last meeting. We need to research a little more what number you're referring to there in terms of out of pocket. I know we've updated the cost information a little bit, but we'd have to take a look at that. Okay, the costs are going up. Well, when would we see an official vote? We're going to talk about the process. Okay, this is a very disorganized idea. What would the benefits be if we actually did this? So we did talk about, or we tried to talk about the possible benefits to the county as a whole, which is why we're interested in offering a subsidy and these deferment option is it helps the DPW meet its nitrogen reduction goals. There are some benefits to the homeowners. If we talked about those briefly, I'm not going to go over those. If those aren't compelling, they're not compelling. But we've tried to describe what those could be. And I guess on the overall process, we've tried our best to explain how the petition process works. And how the changes to the petition process have worked. And, there'll be an opportunity we're always welcome to hear comments. As I mentioned, we're trying hard to explain this process to people. And it's actually a very similar process on the water side. So we're always open to suggestions about that. There's a comment that it seems cheaper to save. Okay, so I'm going to let's let's see. I think I'd like to get through the next couple slides. We're just about the process of what the petition process is like and the community webpage. And I see someone's asking who there is no petition. I want to clarify, this is an information meeting that there was a request for us to come and present additional information. There's no county project plan. There's no petition that's been filed. So if this is not something that the community is interested in, that's fine. And if honestly, from a nitrogen removal standpoint, if people made changes to go to nitrogen removing septic systems, that would be an improvement from a nitrogen removal standpoint, not as much as connecting to the public sewer, but that would still be an improvement. So we're not actually trying to discourage anybody from upgrading a septic system to a nitrogen removal system.
And George, if I may jump in here, just a bit of more background as to how we got to this point. The Severn Grove Improvement Association did ask that we host this additional meeting to help answer some additional questions and clarify some points that residents had. So that's why we're hosting tonight's meeting.
And again, I want to thank you guys for taking your time in the evening to do this for us. I sincerely appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what the petition process looks like. As I've mentioned, it's actually a request for an extension by the community. In the code, it's called extension on initiation by property owners. I do want to emphasize there has not been any petition filed for this community. There is typically in a petition process, there's typically a community coordinator or a community representative that is a liaison between DPW and the community. Initially, we were trying to talk to that person or persons to try to gauge if there's interest in the community. Also to help define the project area. In some instances, the project area can get modified a little bit, although we always have to have a contiguous connection from the county system out to the end. And the petition, so who files a petition or application? So we'll talk about that. We're going to come to that real quickly. And there's also a community application step, which is part of the septic connection program. And that point of the application is actually, let's go ahead to the next slide. So in the application process, what we're trying to do is the county is offering the subsidy to different communities. And but we're still just trying to have this target of 200 homes per year. So the point of the application process is if there's a community that's interested, they submit this non-binding application, and we are going to compare that with other community applications to determine which areas we might offer a subsidy to. So the application step is really the first. It's really on here. It's the second step of the process. We're actually in this area, we're on the first step of the process. So we've had a request. There's been some interest from others in the community about learning more about this program. It was a request to have this informational meeting. And the next step after this would be for an application to be turned in. And after that, we would do what we call a concept level design. So we would take the rough, very high level design that we're showing tonight. We'd look at it a little more closely. We'd update the cost. We would provide another public meeting and a public information meeting to everybody in that possible project area. And that's step 2 piece. And the next step after that would be for the community to submit a petition to DPW. So how that actually works is that we would look for the community representative to let us know that there seems to be interest in a petition, and we would try to define what that project area would be, and then DPW would mail the petition forms to everyone inside that project area, and you have an option to say whether you're interested in the petition or not. And that's step 3. If you're not interested in the petition, if the majority are interested, we would do a preliminary engineering design. If the majority is 50% plus 1 vote, basically, so it's just the bare majority.
So let's say the majority does want it, and then you're on the private road and you say, nope, we're not giving an easement. Where does that land us?
Well, we would not have the right to access that infrastructure. So that would stop it. So we would not put public infrastructure in an area where we couldn't maintain it. So that would be an impediment to it.
And George, I'll just add to that, depending on where the road's located, that part of the project could just simply be omitted from the project area.
That's correct as well. Yeah. Yeah, there's certain area. I mean, an area that would have to be in the project area would be one that is along the alignment to get to the rest of the public infrastructure. So stuff kind of going along Severn Grove Road, all that stuff would have to be in order to connect up to our system. Within some areas, especially where we're doing low pressure sewers, there could be areas that don't have to be in, but we can't hop over properties either. So it has to be continuous. Okay, so I just kind of sticking with the process. So if the majority of people in the project area, homeowners in the project area, say that they're interested in the petition, we'll do an engineering study. It actually goes through my group. We will update. That will be a more detailed study. We'll update the cost estimates. We'll have a formal public meeting. It'll be just like this meeting, but it'll be our public hearing with a formal advertisement. And we will review at that time the newest cost updates and what the estimated assessment would be. After that, in step 4, we would send out ballots to everybody in the project area, and the majority have to be in favor for the project to continue. One thing that two things that are important to note. If the majority is not in favor at step 4, then that's the end of the project, and there's no further commitment from anyone. Okay, and if you don't respond, it's counted as a no. So you need, in order for it to go forward, it has to be 50% plus 1 affirmative yeses. At that point, it does become a binding. It does become binding on everybody in the project area. So that's an important thing to understand, is the way the code is written is the 51% in favor can force the 49% to connect. So that's an important thing to understand about the process.
Except if you're on a private road, correct?
Except, yes, because we would still need an easement to get into the area.
Okay,
yes.
Just want to make sure that's clear. Okay.
But if it's a side road, we don't technically have to go down it, though. I guess there's some roads we have to go down. I'm not sure if I'm explaining this well, but there's, like, say, Severn Road, we're going to have to go down that road, right, to get to the rest.
Yeah, that's not a private road, though.
Yeah, right. But say a side road coming off of that, we don't necessarily have to go down that road. Now, if your question is, if people are on that road and 9 of them want to hook up and 2 of them don't, and they all have some ownership over the road, yes, if we don't have an easement to go in there, we're not going to go in there.
Right. You would have to come on our private road to do that. You wouldn't be able to just, I don't know how you do it without doing that. So,
right. We'd have to have an easement, and we wouldn't
Right.
put it in unless we had an easement. However,
Right.
that worked itself out, and if
Right.
it didn't work itself out, it
I just
wouldn't.
wanted to clarify that point when you said 51%, everybody's got to do it, with the exception of if there's a private road and you have to have the easement.
That's correct. Yeah. So in step 5 here, let's say the vote has gone forward. We do the final designs and the construction costs, and we build the system. And then at the end, the residents have to connect. And let's see, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is just a little more kind of a bigger breakdown on the petition process itself. This is actually the same process for water at this point. So the community files the petition, and that assumes by filing it, what we mean is that more than 50% of the forms that we send out are returned saying, yes, I'm interested in this petition. Step 2 is where we do the preliminary engineering study in our group. Step 3 is the public hearing where we're going to meet, describe the project and the costs. Step 4 is the ballots are sent out. 5 is the ballots come back and DPW staff reviews and validates the ballots. You can go to the next slide. In step 6 and 7, we're going to actually 6, 7, and 8 are all normal public construction process. So we'll do the final design. We'll advertise for construction. The job will go to the lowest responsible bidder. That contractor will do the work. Once the work is complete, all the residents will get a letter saying the project's complete, and you'll have 9 months to hook up from the time that it's ready for service. And the assessments typically begin 1 year after the hookups are done. And that's because the final assessments are based on the final project cost. So we need to complete the costs, kind of have all the finances settled, and then the assessments are determined. I think there was a comment in the chat from someone who had recently purchased a new septic system or a nitrogen removal system. There can be some extensions on the connection time if you recently put in a nitrogen removing septic system or a new septic system, but you would still have the assessment. So you might not have to connect right away, but you would still get the property assessment. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so that was kind of our summary on the process. I guess I want to make sure everyone understands that this is still like on the other side, step 1, there's been no application even filed for this area. And that the county doesn't have a capital project plan to extend sewer out to the area. So sometimes that's, we've had some meetings where people think that we have an active project plan, and that's not the case. So I just want to make sure that's kind of clear. And the next step really for this community, if there was interest, would be to submit an application for consideration that we would rank later in this calendar year. So are there any other questions on the process?
Yeah, my name's Pat Timer, and I worked with Mike and Rikia to set up this meeting. And basically, we're still at step 1. Now, how do we get from step 1 to step 2? I was under the understanding that at this meeting, if there's not enough interest, then you guys are not going to pursue this. But we've only got maybe 22 people or so that are on this call. So I don't think that's going to be a representative number to gauge your interest. Am I correct in that assumption?
I believe you're correct. And I would say that, we have not always had the participation that we would have hoped for some of these meetings. I think, Ricky, do we have the slide? So we were thinking of taking a poll today just to see.
I do have that slide
okay.
ready.
So if you take a poll today out of the 23 and you got, let's say, 10 that want to do it and the other 13 don't want to do it, then what?
I think we would probably conclude that there's really not enough support for it, honestly. I mean, we would probably talk amongst ourselves. We don't really have a firm, I mean, the application is non-binding. It's really just a way for us to compare candidate projects. And so, you know, we've talked on our side about, well, what's the number? What percentage are we looking for? And we don't really have a fixed answer. We don't want one person to submit an application on behalf of 85.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
But I don't think enough people understand this program to gauge the interest level in the community. I mean, there's just such a small number that have been at these meetings that I don't think the word's getting out as to what this is all about.
Yeah.
I mentioned that to Rakia when we first started talking about this. Mike Paredes is our president of our association, and he's a pilot for Southwest Airlines, and he's flying tonight, so he couldn't be on this call. But basically, we just wanted to know if there's going to be a second step.
Well, I think we could do the poll and today, and I think that would be useful because I mean, my observation, I don't know about the rest of the team, but my feeling is, let's say we have 25 people on the call. There's 25 people that are interested enough to even bother listening in on the call, right? And so some of those people are a little more predisposed to the project than other people, right? So it's not really a neutral cross section, right, of the community.
Exactly.
So that's why when you were saying, well, if less than 50% of the people on the call tonight weren't interested, I would probably feel like I think that probably means we don't have a lot of participation. The broader thing was we're going to talk a little bit about that there is a community webpage that you can access on the internet, and we do encourage people to go in and just say whether they're interested or not right there as well, because we can see the responses, and so that can let us. So, like, if you have a neighbor that couldn't attend the meeting, they can go to the webpage. They can look at the slides. They can listen to the presentation, and and they can leave a comment there, so we can get some feedback that way. So that's been one of the advantages of doing the meetings in virtual, is that Ricky will send a link out so you can go. Other people can go see it if they didn't have a chance to go to the meeting.
But getting them to do that is another story. I mean, it's just this community only has maybe 15 or 20 people in any of our community meetings.
Well, I can't. Yeah, I understand, but it's still a community driven process. So right. I mean, there has to be.
Yeah, I mean, Pat. Hey, Pat, it's Laurie.
Yeah.
I mean, the emails were sent out. I don't go to a lot of the community meetings either, but when they're this is important to me. Mm-hmm. I made it a priority. I put it on my calendar. I made sure I joined. So, it's not like they don't know about it.
Well, we were trying to push for a in-person meeting, have these folks come to the clubhouse area there and present this in person. I think you would probably get more people to come to that than you do with this setup. But it's a logistics problem. If you had all these people show up that are all the way down to Bescade Road, we don't have the space for that. So this was really the next best thing to do. Mm-hmm. But, it sounds like to me that we might get stalled right here, and the county definitely wants to put this program forward. Now, I'm not for it or against it, so don't take me wrong, but I don't think we're getting the true picture.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, they went on email. That's how I found out about it. And, the only way to get everyone down the clubhouse is to do another food truck, honestly.
Well,
Good point.
that's a good point. Yeah.
Well, I mean, how to best reach people and let them know about the program is something that our team is interested in hearing any thoughts on. When we started doing these meetings, we originally were thinking we would be doing them in person, but with the COVID, we were doing them remotely. I think there's been some advantages to the remote meetings in that we can. It's actually a little easier for us to answer questions that come up because some of us can research things while other people are talking. And we also have the ability to record the presentations and make that information available. It is true that we've had instances where elderly people not necessarily able to reach that, and we have sent people summary brochures of what was discussed at some of the meetings, if that when we're aware of that situation. So, I mean, we do want people to just learn about the program, but ultimately, if it's not a good fit, it's not a good fit.
Well, I think everybody probably feels the same way I do. How much is this going to cost me now? How much is this going to cost me per year after this? And what are the ramifications going to be if I sell my house within 5 or 10 years? Those are the main things I think most people are interested in. I mean, everybody wants to save the bay, that's for sure. But will they want to save the bay if it's going to cost them a lot of money up front to do that?
No. We have a Save the Bay Foundation. We've had it for 30 years. The Bay is like the worst ever. I've been involved with groups who are going out and doing oyster beds, and guess what? The Bay's still messed up. So I'm sorry, I have an issue with this.
Have you been successful installing the septic to sewer program in another community near us that we could use as a role model?
So we have not had any communities go through the process yet. We've had a few communities do applications. Last fall was actually the first time we did any outreach meetings because the legislation authorizing the subsidies and the deferment wasn't enacted till the very beginning of 2021. So the short answer is no, we haven't had anybody do it yet. We have had communities do water petitions, but water petitions are generally less expensive than sewer petitions because the water lines are all pressurized and they can be shallower. It's much easier to route the water line than a sewer line.
So are you saying that this whole program might not fly if you don't get anybody on board with it? Well,
the goal is to get 200 homes per year. And what we're trying to do is if we need to make adjustments. Well, I mean, I guess when you're saying it might not fly, it's not. We're committed to trying to make the program work,
right? With
this voluntary incentive-based program. I mean, that's probably the only way I can answer it. If we can't get anybody interested, then we would have to reevaluate, how we're going to, what our approach is going to be.
With the complexity of the costs and all the various variables that factor into that, have you given any thought at all to going into a community like ours, which is fairly homogeneous, and randomly picking a homeowner and giving that homeowner much more precise estimates of present and long-term costs so that the rest of the community could kind of do a comparison based on that? I think it's the uncertainty of knowing what the cost is that is really frustrating people.
Well, it's not only that. I mean, right now, our septic is not costing us anything except to have the honey dipper come out every couple of years and drain it out. But that's all, that's what, $300 or so. So it's $150 a year.
Yeah,
is what we're paying now.
Yeah, exactly. And then you're going to have to pay this $80,000 plus an either monthly or quarterly water bill on top of the annual bill of this 80 grand. Yeah, it's crazy.
So we need to have a more precise estimate of what an individual's cost would be within our community.
Well, getting a precise estimate for each individual home would...
Just one home. So the rest of the people would say, well, if it would cost this person that much, I may be paying this much more because I have a longer setback from the road, or I have, some of these other things. But I don't mean everybody. I can see that would be prohibitive for you. But people don't know what their cost is going to be. And that's a real barrier.
Okay, that's a fair point. We'll have to talk about that. I know from, the way we've tried to assemble this information, there's so much variability on an individual property.
Right.
What we also don't want to get ourselves in a position where we tell someone we think it's going to be $7,000 and then it turns out to be $10,000.
Right.
I understand.
And so that's why we've just tried to present the information the health department was willing to share with us, because at that point we're just showing the cost that others, have paid without, really trying. But it's not it's a fair point, and we'll talk about it. I think the specificity is difficult. I mean, last year we did over 20 of these public meetings, so we try to we have these concept level layouts for 4 different areas that we think can be served, which is how we've put this information together, and we have rough estimates or concept level estimates based on those layouts. So I wouldn't say they're customized, but they're more than just ballpark numbers. And if we were to move further in the process, we would further refine that. So the point, say, of an informational meeting like tonight is not necessarily to have anyone make a decision. I mean, you're not deciding tonight. So whether it's $70,000 or $80,000 or $60,000, you're still not deciding it tonight. And I think we're just trying to provide the information as best we have it right now. I think there's going to be a number of people that might say $20,000 is too much. I'm done. And I think, that was one of the things when we were developing our outreach is everybody wants to hear the cost. So what is the best information we can provide about the cost at this level, at this stage where there is no defined project area exactly. And people are we're just trying to help people understand what the whole process looks like.
Hey there, this is Zach. I wanted to just chime in on the last things that you just said. And I think that really it seems, obviously a lot of the people are on this call because they have some level of interest, whether it's in the septic system itself or the connecting to city sewer itself or just gathering information. Certainly everyone's got some base level of interest. It seems though that there is a lot being caught up in trying to understand specific costs right at this moment in order to get on board or not on board with the idea. But you had also commented a minute ago how this is more of just an information session. This isn't, the intent of this really isn't to outline any hard costs for anyone. And so I feel like people would be doing themselves and the neighbors a disservice by making any sort of set decision on the entire project this early in this presentation. I think it would be smart for everyone to be able to at least unify enough to be able to go on to another step where we will get greater understanding of numbers and more information gathered by proceeding into a next step. Because even at that next step, there is no hard commitment, even at that, from anyone, from what I'm understanding. Is that correct?
So let me give you some really blunt feedback, and this is going to be as blunt as I can be. I've come to each and every one of these meetings, and I have no more information today than I had after the first meeting. So everybody else's comments are really circling around the fact that we aren't getting enough answers to our questions, and provided those answers in a written format so that we can actually make a decision. So, I don't understand why we would even consider taking any sort of vote or moving forward at all if you can't provide answers to the basic information that we're asking.
Well, what specific question do you think has not been answered tonight?
Well, cost is the biggest one. Easement comes to mind.
Well,
ongoing fees. How much?
What would you like to know about costs that we haven't?
Well, you've been giving us the same cost factors now for several months, and I'm looking. I get the Wall Street Journal. I read what's going on out there, and I can see that costs everywhere else on infrastructure for projects are going up. So, I got a real big piece of doubt going into this project that your cost estimates are accurate. The second thing is that it's really hard to get anybody in the trade, somebody out on these properties this large within 9 months to hook up all of these systems properly is another big challenge, and that's also going to add costs. So, there's a lot of inflationary pressures out there right now, and those inflationary pressures are going to play into this. And nobody else in the federal government, at least, is able to say right now what these projects are going to cost because inflation is out of control. Some are saying 15 to 25% in the trade areas. So I just don't buy your cost numbers. So you're not providing us any real estimations, in my opinion. You're giving us the same stuff you gave us day one. And until I get some clarity, I just don't see how I could say yes to something that I just don't understand.
So, okay, there's several points in there. So I don't know that we've cost indexed. Ed, maybe you can answer that. I don't know if we've done a cost index adjustment since December's meeting.
Yes, so that was one of the adjustments that were made recently to the estimated project costs. So that's the public side costs. And yeah, and inflation has been a factor recently. We're looking at about 8% in the last 2 years, but we can't project past today. We're not attempting to say what it'll cost in 2 years or 3 years when the assessment is actually set. So there's some uncertainty, and there's not a whole lot we can do about that right now.
So if the project went through a petition process and we did a preliminary engineering report, and in our group, we prepare the project estimate. And at that point, we would develop a cost estimate at the time. So let's say we're doing this study next year at this time. And then we would put in an escalation adjustment for what we think the cost would be at the midpoint of construction. It usually takes us 6 months to hire a contractor at least. So we would put an escalation factor in at that time. And that would be incorporated into the ballot rate that is actually voted on. So we make an attempt to project out what we think those market conditions are going to be when that formal ballot is taken. And
So when-
of course,
so
I
what-
agree that there's a lot. The inflation is very variable. It's variable within pipe materials right now. So it is difficult to track. But the other piece is if the final costs are higher than, I think if it's more than 15% above the ballot rate, the community would have. Or so if the project estimate based on the bids is 15% higher, the community has an opportunity to back out at that time.
Okay, that's a good piece of information now. So we would know that we would be capped at a certain price, but that price wouldn't be determined until we voted on it already.
That's correct. That's the public hearing. Is that we're going to do the engineering study based on a pump station at a particular site. So right now we're being real vague a little, right, about where we would put the pump station. So if we did the engineering study, we would have a spot. This is where we think we're going to put the pump station. This is what the layout's going to look like. This is the cost for this type of pump station. We would figure out which houses are low pressure sewers, which ones are gravity lines. Okay, that all goes into the construction cost estimate. And that we put that into a project cost estimate, and which is going to include some of that escalation. And then Kim's group would also be there and say, okay, engineering gave us these project costs. This is what the financing is going to be. And you're going to be sent a ballot. And that ballot is going to say, I agree to pay this much per year for sewer service. There's more words, but it's essentially saying that. And that's going to be a number that comes from us and adapted based on the financing, right? And if it turns out that we open bids and that number is going to be significantly higher, there's an opportunity to back out on that. If we open bids and it's lower, we continue with the project because we already have the community's approval for the rate that was voted on. But the final rate is based on the final project costs.
Now, it sounds like you're talking about several different engineering studies. There was something mentioned earlier about a concept engineering, which I guess hasn't even been done yet. And then there's a preliminary engineering report, and then there's a detailed engineering report. Can you give us an idea of what the variability is expected? How close will the cost be once you've done the concept engineering? Is that a plus or minus 25% or plus or minus 50%? And also for the preliminary engineering and the detail engineering?
Ed, do you know those? There's kind of industry ranges for concept engineering and schematic design, but I do not recall that.
Yeah, I'm afraid I don't have it up in front of me, but I think at the first next study, the concept engineering study, we're probably estimating within a plus 30%. minus 15, minus 20% range. And then as the project concept moves forward, that range tightens up a little bit. So we're not there yet, I guess, is the other comment worth making. We're still at a very, right now these costs are, that's why we're showing the ranges that we're showing on those colored bar graphs. It's very preliminary.
So, and you're correct, and you're saying we haven't done the concept engineering yet. That's correct, because this is an informational meeting. Why the reason we're showing a layout is because it's been years ago now, but when the DPW was first looking at the Chesapeake Bay nutrient requirements, that we're talking about connecting 50% of our septic systems, we developed very preliminary concept level layouts of areas that we thought could be connected to the public sewer. So with the aim to figure out whether it was even possible to connect 20,000 septic systems. So, and we also did very concept level costs associated with that. We wanted to figure out what looked like it was what seemed possible and what kind of cost are we talking about in terms of trying to hook up 20,000 septic systems. So when we're now we're not trying to hook up 20,000 septic systems any longer. Our goal is this 6,000 over 30 years, but we have all that information. So we felt like, why not share what we have, right? Or otherwise we're going to talk to a community and we can't even show them what a possible connection looks like, right? So we're trying to show, what we think is how it could be connected. And then we, based on the costs, these concept level costs, what we think those costs are going to be. We're not showing the same cost to every community because we have these concept layouts. So we're trying to show in each time we're talking to community what service might look like for this area and what we think it might cost. But if the community is not interested, that's as far as it goes. And if the community is interested, then we'll take a closer look at it. I mean, a lot of these layouts, these concept level layouts, were actually done, many years ago. So things change. So we do need to take another look at them. And, vacant lots could be filled now, and there could be other things that could be changed. So there would definitely be a progression from right now where very limited concept level information is all we're talking about. The concept engineering memo is really taking it, maybe one step is looking a little more closely to make sure we're not, that the conditions on the, haven't really changed from when we did these earlier layouts. And then if the community is interested in the petition, that's when we would hire an engineer and do a preliminary engineering study. And at that point, it is more detailed. It's still schematic, but it's more detailed, and it's going to actually look at all these individual properties and refine that engineering layout. And the cost information that was developed is a little dated now, and we're trying to discuss how to update that. Right now, we use standard industry indexes. All right, so we basically started with layouts from years ago that were based on our metrics from actual projects. Things like the cost for grinder pump lines and gravity lines, and we've been updating that. But with the current conditions, we're talking about how do we keep that more updated. We understand, I certainly understand your concern about the information being outdated. And we're going to try to figure out how to address that when we're talking to communities. We're not doing anyone any favors if we're under presenting things.
I think we ought to go ahead and try to wrap up now, because it's been 2 hours, and we try to keep our meetings to an hour. So can you go ahead and, I don't know how you initiate this preliminary voting process, but you can go ahead and address that if you would.
Rikia, did you say you had a slide about that?
I do. I do have the polling slide. So just for context, this is not a vote per se. It is an informal poll for us to gauge interest on whether the attendees on this call are interested in applying for the septic to sewer connection program. That application allows the county to review and rank the communities that would receive a subsidy. So you will be selecting the option that you agree with. I'm going to open up the poll in just a few seconds here. You'll see it pop up on your screen, and then we'll go from there.
Proceed at all?
And I guess I would say if there's additional questions that that people would like answered, you can please send us the questions, and we'll do our best to provide those answers. We're not going to be able to provide hard construction cost information at this time. We're not at that point in the process. So I understand there's frustration with that, but that's just not where we are in the process. And it's not a binding, you're not at any kind of binding step at this point.
Are we going to see the results of this informal poll?
Yes, I'm happy to show the results once it's closed. I'm going to leave it open for about 30 more seconds. Can everyone see the results of the poll?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. George, I'll go back to the page about the community page. This is the community page that we referenced earlier this evening, and this is where you'll find a recording of the December meeting as well as this meeting. Look for the recording and slides from this meeting in about a week or so.
Oh, sorry. As I mentioned, on this web page, we have the earlier presentations. I think the meeting summary.
Yes.
Ricky, also from December, I believe.
Yes.
And then the recordings. And actually, we will post tonight's stuff. And as I mentioned, if there's any other questions, feel free to send those, and we'll try to provide answers as best we can. And I would say, really, based on the polling tonight, it doesn't seem like there's a lot of interest from those on the call. So unless we were to see a significant change, like of people coming through the website, I would assume that this would probably be the last meeting we have about this.
Well, I'll report this back to Mike tomorrow, and it might be we'll have some more discussion among ourselves, but I still don't think we had enough people on this call to really give it the justice it deserves, and it might not change the results at all. So,
well, I appreciate that. We are available to talk again, of course. So, and again, open to any suggestions on how, we can kind of better get.
So if we wanted to move forward with this, then just to get back to Rakia and express our interest sort of all over again. Is that what you're saying?
At a later date.
At a later date.
Yeah, I would say probably at a later date. I think, again, unless there was a significant amount of activity in the next couple of weeks,
right?
People saying, "Yeah, I definitely want to do it." I would probably say we would want to wait until a later date. There just doesn't seem to be enough interest right now.
Right. Yeah, I honestly don't want to keep going through this every 6 months.
But I mean, the only other thing I got to say about it is you've only got 22 people or 21 people on this call out of the whole 80 some people in this community. Plus, you've got the communities all the way down to Severn Grove Road. I mean, to Bestgate Road. So,
why would that be all the way down to Bestgate Road?
That they're included in this project. It's just not just us. Those people are also included.
Yeah, we would.
Well, then I don't know how we're responsible for them. I'm not doing that.
Well, you're not responsible for them. They were also invited.
They were invited, right?
Meeting as well. Yeah. But
okay, that goes back to, the opportunity to join any of the 3 meetings on this, and they didn't. So either, this is a lot of, you guys put in a lot of time, you, the county, putting together these slides, keep presenting it, and it's coming up negative. I thought it was done last time. There was no interest. And then this comes around again, like, oh, there's interest. Well, I don't know. It seems like I feel like there's 1 or 2 people who are interested. Nobody else is. This keeps getting pushed. It's not fair to us. It's not fair to the county to have to keep going through this over and over again.
Well, I think some people have the fear that this is going to get shoved down their throats. You only got to have 50%. So they've got interest just from that standpoint, even though they might be against it.
Well, yeah, I'm one of those people. That's why I'm on this call, Pat, because I'm one of those people.
Okay.
We might be interested in this at a later date, when the whole community people have a chance to talk about it and things. Right now, clearly, we don't want to waste any more of your time. You guys have been fabulous. You've been as responsive as you're possibly able to be, and we're terribly grateful to you. But we really don't want to waste any more of your time. Let's wait and see down the road a little bit whether interest is generated, maybe through the papers and through the program and through advertisement. I don't know, but at this time, I think clearly this is an indication that this community really isn't ready to do it. Not even apply. The application would be premature, and that would just be more work for you, and more Zoom calls. So perhaps it's just something we should put it all off, or maybe we'll revisit this in a year or something, and that might. Maybe that'll be a better, more receptive time for us.
And maybe the community should actually meet and discuss it instead of just a few people pushing for it.
You're right.
Exactly.
You're absolutely right.
Mm-hmm. Either that or tell the county to pay for the whole tab.
Hey, I'm all for that.
I mean, if the county's willing to take, some of the tax money they've been collecting from me over the years, that's cool, like to pay for it.
I agree.
Then, yeah, that's a different thing. But I'm not going 80, 100 grand in the hole for this. And, oh, kids, sorry. Not only are we dead, you can sell our house. You're going to owe money on it. So, no.
It's very true.
Oh, well, thank you again for everything that you've done and for all the time and effort that you've put forth. I know you planned on this for an hour call, and we're over 2 hours now. So we're very grateful to you.
Thank you. We appreciate your feedback. And it's our pleasure. I know it's a lot of information, so we appreciate your staying with us to go through this. There was a question about, are there suggestions to the Maryland legislature about concerns about the cost?
Yeah, George, my question, I'll make it simple, is just, I think there are reasonable concerns here about the cost structure, the uncertainty. It's the things that everyone's mentioned already, but maybe the issue is just they need to revise the policy here to make the incentives more favorable so people want to do it. Is there a way to give that feedback that's useful, constructive?
Sure, you don't need to go to the Maryland legislature for that. You could just comment to us, it's too expensive.
All right, well, I think
it's still too much money. What we've tried to set the subsidy really at a point where, and Kim can speak to this in more detail, she's still on the call, is that where we felt we could kind of absorb the cost within our current utility rate structure, because the water and sewer utility rates actually pay for all the water and sewer work. So, if we were to increase that subsidy amount, it starts to come at the expense of other things, right? So that's sort of where we are, in terms of how we worked out the subsidy and how we discussed it at the time with the septic task force a few years ago. Right. So, changing it if you were to contribute more money to it, it becomes more of it becomes a trade-off at that point.
I see. That's helpful. Thanks.
Okay. Well, I really appreciate everyone staying with us. This has been a long meeting. We haven't actually had too many meetings where we had this many people stay with us this long. So I appreciate everyone's feedback, and feel free to let us know. We do a lot of these presentations, but we're always looking to try to make them a little more understandable, or if there's points that we're not explaining very well, if we can, have some feedback on that, we'd appreciate it. So, all right. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Shit.